Hello and welcome to lesson 6 of the grade 4 tutor book. In this particular lesson, it's quite an interesting lesson because we're actually talking about the instruments of the orchestra, and then we're talking about transposition, how you transpose a melody into a different key. Because what you've got to remember is some orchestral instruments are what are called transposing instruments. So this book gives you an opportunity to actually practice transposing their music into, if you like, a home key. So more will be explained about that later. So when we're talking about the instruments of the orchestra, remember that you have really 4 families of musical instruments. You have your strings, you have your percussion, you have your brass, and you have your woodwind. So each of the different sections of the orchestra have their own unique feel about them, and certainly some little things that are just unique to them. And so this book explains that. So with the stringed instruments, for example, you have bow signs. So you have this little V sign, which signifies an up bow, and you have this little sign, which signifies a down bow. The violin uses the treble clef, the viola uses the alto clef, the cello uses the alto clef and the bass clef and the treble clef, and the double bass uses the bass clef. You need to know about the clefs that are used, as this may well come up as an instrument question for your exam. So moving on to the woodwind section. So in the woodwind section, you've got flute, oboe, clarinet and bassoon. There are other instruments in the woodwind section, but for this particular grade, the only ones you need to know about are your flute, oboe, clarinet and bassoon. So your flute uses the treble clef. The oboe is a double reed instrument and uses the treble clef. The clarinet is a single reed instrument, and uses the treble clef, and it's also a transposing instrument, and more will be explained about that later. The bassoon is a double reed instrument and uses the bass, alto and treble clefs. So moving on to the brass section, and again there are more brass instruments you need to know about at a later stage, but for this grade you just need to know about the trumpet, French horn, trombone and tuba. So the trumpet uses the treble clef and it's a transposing instrument. The French horn uses the treble clef and bass clef and is a transposing instrument. The trombone uses a slide to play and uses treble, alto and bass clefs. And the tuba uses the bass clef. So moving into the percussion section, and again there's a lot of percussion instruments in, but really there's just 2 major sections you've got to remember for this particular grade. That you have what are called pitched percussion or tuned percussion, and you have unpitched percussion. So the pitched percussion is talking about instruments like the xylophone, the glockenspiel and the timpani. What you've got to remember is the xylophone is made of wood, the glockenspiel is made of metal, and of course the timpani, you can have different kinds of notes that are on that. Okay, and so the unpitched percussion, you've got gong, triangle, cymbals, castanets, bass drum and snare drums. Then you've got a whole list of questions which talks about the orchestral instruments. So question 1 says, what clef does a flute normally use? Number 2, name a transposing instrument. Number 3, name a double reed instrument. Number 4, name a pitched percussion instrument. Question 5, name an unpitched percussion instrument. Number 6, name a stringed instrument that uses the alto clef. Number 7, name a brass instrument that has a slide. Number 8, name the kind of drum. Number 9, name the lowest sounding stringed instrument. And number 10, what clef does this instrument use? Now Now, as previously mentioned, you do get some instruments that are called transposing instruments, and we're talking of things like the clarinet. That's a very good example of a transposing instrument. So we've already explained that certain orchestral instruments, such as the clarinet and the trumpet, are transposing instruments. But what does that mean? So transposition is simply taking a melody and changing the pitch of the notes while keeping the intervals between them the same. The rhythm and the intervals between all the notes remain the same, but it's the pitch that will go either higher or lower depending on how we've transposed it. So for this exam, you are required to transpose music up or down a major second. Because remember, the clarinet, you see, it's a clarinet in B flat, so that means you transpose it up a major second or down. So if transposing instruments like the clarinet or trumpet, or a minor third, as in transposing for the clarinet in A. So that's why you have examples of transposing music in major seconds and also transposing music in the minor third as well. So it relates to the clarinet and trumpet in B flat or the clarinet in A. So here we've got an example of a piece written in the key of C major, okay? And so it says, but if you were to transpose the melody up a second, it's still the same melody, but now it's in the key of D. So you've gone up a second to make it in the key of D major. And you can see you've got your new key signature to show that. So then you're asked to do a similar transposition down here, transposing a melody from the key of C to the key of D. So what you've got to remember, as well as changing the actual key signature, you also have to put the notes up a second as well. So the C becomes a D, the D becomes an E, the E becomes an F, and so on. Now, when you're transposing down or up a minor third, it gets a little more problematic. So that's why I've actually put some little hints and little tips to help you out here. So you can see the tip 1 is to transpose the key signature. That's the first stage you do. So say for example you've got this melody here and it's in the key of G, and it says transpose this melody down a minor third. If you're transposing it down and you're going down, you're transposing it down 3 semitones, so your G major becomes E major. Then after you've done that, you transpose down the notes as well. So if you count down 3 semitones from the notes, you're going to end up G, F, E on the E, and so on. Then remember that some of the music might have accidentals in too, like this one's got an F natural in. So what you've got to remember is that if the accidental in this piece, like this F natural, then what happens is that that's been lowered by a semitone from the original F sharp in the key signature. We therefore need to lower this note in the new key signature a semitone lower as well. So that's why the D sharp in this becomes D natural. So then you've got 2 extracts of music here where you're asked to transpose. So the first one says transpose this melody down a minor third on the stave below. And then the next one says transpose the following melody up a minor third on the stave below. And that completes lesson 6.